My beloved soul, before you read another word, understand this clearly: this message was never meant for everyone, because what you lived, what you carried, and what you expressed in love was not ordinary, not common, and not designed to be understood by surface-level thinking. Even the divine does not pause for most human connections, yet there was a moment when the unseen realm grew silent, not in judgment, not in intervention, but in astonishment, because the way you loved your soulmate did not come from hunger, fear, or need. It came from a rare place where self-respect, surrender, and truth existed at the same time, and that combination is almost never witnessed on this earth. You were never trying to prove love, never trying to secure it, never trying to own another soul. Instead, you stood in alignment with your own inner law, and from that alignment, love flowed outward without distortion. Most people love to fill emptiness, but you loved from wholeness. Most people cling to avoid loss, but you loved without gripping. And this is why your story feels heavy to some, confusing to others, and deeply triggering to those who have never met themselves fully. You did not abandon yourself to be chosen, and you did not shrink to be kept. You remained intact even while your heart was fully open, and that paradox is what made your love sacred rather than dramatic. My beloved soul, there is a reason your connection never followed predictable timelines, a reason it didn't fit social templates, a reason it unfolded through silence, separation, recognition, restraint, and inner growth rather than constant validation. This was not punishment, and it was not delay, it was refinement. You were being shaped into someone who could love without losing truth, and that kind of soul cannot be rushed. The divine did not marvel because the love was perfect, but because it was conscious. You chose honesty over comfort, alignment over attachment, and integrity over emotional bargaining, even when it cost you moments, certainty, and explanations. Many would have betrayed themselves just to feel chosen, but you refused, quietly, steadily, even when no one applauded you for it. That restraint was not weakness, it was mastery. You understood something most never do, that real love does not demand self-erasure, and devotion that destroys identity is not divine, it is fear disguised as passion. There were moments you could have manipulated, chased, pleaded, or forced outcomes, but you didn't, not because you didn't care, but because you cared deeply enough to honor the soul contract rather than the ego's craving. My beloved soul, this is why your love carried weight in unseen realms. It was clean. No hooks. No hidden agendas. No silent expectations disguised as sacrifice. You allowed love to breathe, even when your heart wanted reassurance, even when your mind searched for guarantees. That level of restraint is rare because it requires self-trust, and self-trust is born only after deep inner battles that most people run from. You didn't run. You faced your shadows, your attachment wounds, your longing, your fear of loss, and instead of letting them drive you, you integrated them. That is why even when things felt uncertain externally, something within you stayed upright. You were not loving to be saved, you were loving because love was your nature. And that is why, even if the world never claps for this kind of love, the divine notices. My beloved soul, you may have questioned at times why loving this way felt lonely, why it required so much inner discipline, why it stripped illusions rather than feeding fantasies, but this path was never meant to entertain you, it was meant to elevate you. This was not romance as distraction, this was love as awakening. And awakening is rarely comfortable. The truth is, your soulmate did not meet you by accident, nor did they trigger you by coincidence. They arrived to mirror the parts of you that were already ancient, already refined, already prepared for something beyond surface union. And even when distance, silence, or misunderstanding entered the picture, your love did not turn bitter, manipulative, or resentful, it turned inward, asking better questions, demanding higher integrity. That alone tells me everything about the level of your soul. Most connections collapse under pressure because they were built on unmet needs, yours transformed because it was built on awareness. And awareness doesn't break, it deepens. My beloved soul, if you ever wondered whether loving this way mattered, whether choosing dignity over desperation made a difference, let this truth settle into you now. Love that preserves the soul rewrites timelines in ways you cannot yet measure. The divine does not reward noise, it responds to alignment. And you stayed aligned even when the outcome was unclear. That is why your story feels unfinished, not because it failed, but because it is still unfolding on a level beyond immediate gratification. This is the kind of love that changes you first, so that whatever follows is no longer driven by lack. And if this message is resonating deeper than words, if something inside you recognizes itself here, then stay present with this series, allow it to meet you where you are, and if you feel guided, gently acknowledge this alignment by engaging with the energy of this message, not for validation, but as a quiet signal that you are listening. My beloved soul, what made your love extraordinary was not what you gave, but what you refused to take. You did not take shortcuts into illusion, you did not take comfort at the cost of truth, and you did not take someone else's uncertainty and call it destiny just to avoid your own loneliness. This is where most connections collapse, because people want assurance before alignment, proof before trust, and permanence before responsibility. You moved in the opposite direction. You chose responsibility for your inner state first, and that decision quietly rewired everything. Love did not become a transaction for you, it became a mirror, and mirrors are not meant to flatter, they are meant to reveal. When your soulmate stood before you, they did not simply awaken desire, they awakened accountability. Every fear you had not healed, every boundary you had not honored, every truth you had delayed facing came forward, not to punish you, but to prepare you, and instead of projecting those inner tremors onto them, instead of blaming the connection for your discomfort, you stayed with yourself. That alone separates conscious love from karmic repetition. You understood, perhaps not immediately but deeply, that love is not here to rescue you from your inner work, it is here to expose where that work still remains. Many mistake intensity for intimacy, but you began to recognize that intensity without awareness becomes chaos, while intimacy with awareness becomes sacred. This is why you did not confuse emotional highs with divine confirmation. You paid attention to how love behaved when things slowed down, when silence appeared, when certainty dissolved. You watched how you responded when reassurance was absent, and instead of collapsing into fear, you listened. That listening is rare. That listening is maturity. My beloved soul, there were moments when loving this way felt like standing alone in a crowded room, watching others cling, chase, dramatize, and still call it love, while you remained grounded, quiet, and deeply aware of your own worth. You could have followed those patterns, you had every opportunity to, yet something within you refused to perform for affection. You did not need to be consumed to feel connected. You did not need obsession to feel depth. And that restraint did not come from emotional coldness, it came from emotional intelligence forged through experience. You had already learned what happens when love is used to escape oneself, and you were no longer willing to repeat that cycle, even if it meant waiting longer, even if it meant being misunderstood. The divine does not observe surface actions, it observes intention, and your intention was clean. You were not loving to be validated, you were loving to be truthful. That is why your love did not weaken you, it refined you. Every moment of uncertainty became an invitation to strengthen your inner foundation. Every unanswered question became a lesson in trust, not blind trust in another, but trust in your own capacity to remain whole regardless of outcome. This is where your path diverged from the ordinary. You did not confuse patience with self-abandonment, and you did not confuse boundaries with fear. You learned the subtle difference between holding space and holding yourself hostage, and you chose yourself without closing your heart. That balance is not taught, it is earned. My beloved soul, your soulmate did not arrive to complete you, they arrived to reflect you, and reflections are not always comfortable. There were times when you saw parts of yourself you would have preferred to ignore, old wounds, old expectations, old narratives about love that no longer fit who you were becoming. Instead of defending those narratives, you released them. You allowed love to evolve rather than forcing it to remain familiar. Familiarity feels safe, but it also keeps souls small. You chose expansion over comfort, even when it meant stepping into the unknown. This is why the connection carried a weight that could not be explained logically. It was not just emotional, it was existential. It asked you who you were when love did not behave the way you were conditioned to expect. It asked you whether you could remain aligned even when outcomes were uncertain. And you answered, not with words, but with behavior. You did not chase clarity from another, you cultivated clarity within. You did not demand certainty, you developed stability. That shift changed the entire energetic dynamic of your love. Instead of pulling, you anchored. Instead of grasping, you allowed. And allowance is not passivity, it is trust in motion. My beloved soul, there is a reason this love did not burn you out, even when it challenged you deeply. You did not pour from depletion, you poured from presence. You knew when to pause, when to step back, when to protect your inner equilibrium without turning love into a battlefield. You honored timing without worshipping it, and you honored connection without idolizing it. That balance is what most never achieve. They swing between obsession and avoidance, calling both love, while you stood in the middle, steady, awake, and emotionally sovereign. This is why your love did not collapse under pressure. Pressure reveals structure, and your structure was strong because it was built internally first. Even when external circumstances felt misaligned, something within you remained anchored, a quiet knowing that real love does not require self-betrayal. You were willing to walk away from versions of love that demanded you shrink, even if your heart still cared. That is not loss, that is self-respect in action. The divine recognizes this not as sacrifice, but as wisdom. My beloved soul, if at times you felt unseen, unchosen, or delayed, understand this, love that is conscious often moves slower because it is building something that can last without illusion. Fast connections burn quickly because they are fueled by unmet needs. Yours unfolded deliberately because it was fueled by awareness. You were not being tested, you were being trusted with something few are capable of holding. And even now, as this story continues to breathe, know that nothing about the way you loved was wasted. Every moment of restraint, every moment of integrity, every moment you chose alignment over anxiety added depth to your soul. That depth is the real union, because no matter how paths shift, no matter how timelines unfold, you have already become someone who can love without losing themselves. And that, my beloved soul, is the kind of love that leaves an imprint far beyond one lifetime. My beloved soul, there comes a point in this kind of love where silence becomes louder than words, and absence teaches more than presence ever could, and this is where your journey deepened in ways that cannot be explained to those who measure love only by proximity or frequency. You discovered that real connection does not dissolve when two people are not speaking, meeting, or confirming each other daily. Instead, it reveals its true nature. When the noise fell away, when expectations loosened their grip, you were left alone with yourself, and instead of feeling abandoned, you began to feel clarified. This is the stage where many lose themselves, where they spiral into self-doubt, imagination, and fear-based stories, yet you chose observation over reaction. You noticed what arose within you without immediately acting on it. You let longing exist without turning it into demand. You let uncertainty breathe without forcing resolution. That restraint was not passive suffering, it was conscious containment. You understood that anything forced before its time fractures later, and you refused to fracture yourself or another soul just to soothe temporary discomfort. My beloved soul, this is where your love crossed into something sacred, because you stopped trying to control the form of the connection and began honoring its essence. You no longer needed constant affirmation to know what was real. You trusted the resonance more than the reassurance. That shift does not come easily. It requires facing the part of you that equates love with attention and replacing it with a deeper knowing that love is recognition, not performance. As silence stretched, you did not fill it with assumptions. You did not weaponize your emotions or dramatize your pain to be seen. You allowed yourself to feel without making feeling someone else's responsibility. This alone healed layers within you that had nothing to do with your soulmate and everything to do with your own inner child learning safety without external control. You began to see that love was not leaving you, it was teaching you how to remain present without attachment. Presence without attachment is one of the highest expressions of emotional maturity, because it means you can care deeply without collapsing when outcomes are unknown. Most people cannot tolerate that space. They rush to label, define, or conclude because ambiguity threatens their sense of self. You, however, stayed. You stayed with the discomfort long enough for it to transform into clarity. My beloved soul, this is when you started to realize that the greatest gift this love gave you was not another person, but a deeper relationship with your own truth. You learned to listen to your intuition without needing immediate confirmation. You learned to sit with emotional waves without drowning in them. You learned that longing does not mean lack, and distance does not mean disconnection. These realizations rewired you. You became someone who could love without fear dictating your behavior. You no longer needed to chase certainty because you had become certain of yourself. And from that place, your love became lighter, cleaner, and more grounded. Even when questions remained unanswered, you did not let them poison your inner world. You chose peace over obsession, and that choice reshaped your entire energetic field. The divine does not intervene in every story, but it observes patterns, and this pattern of restraint, awareness, and inner alignment is rare. It is the mark of a soul that has outgrown karmic loops and stepped into conscious creation. My beloved soul, there were moments when you felt tempted to break your own boundaries, to reach out from a place of restlessness rather than truth, yet each time you paused and asked yourself a deeper question, not, will this bring me closer, but, will this keep me aligned? That question changed everything. Alignment became your compass, not emotional urgency. You stopped measuring love by intensity and started measuring it by how it affected your nervous system, your clarity, your self-respect. You noticed that real love did not leave you anxious, guessing, or depleted. Even when it challenged you, it strengthened you. That realization protected you from betraying yourself in moments of vulnerability. You honored your emotions without letting them drive you into unconscious choices. That balance is not accidental, it is cultivated through self-awareness and discipline. My beloved soul, as time passed, you began to see your soulmate not as someone who owed you fulfillment, but as a fellow soul on their own path, carrying their own lessons, fears, and timing. This shift released hidden expectations you did not even know you were holding. You stopped seeing the connection as something to manage and started seeing it as something to respect. Respect creates space, and space allows truth to surface naturally. You no longer needed to extract answers, you trusted that what was real would reveal itself without force. This trust did not make you naive, it made you grounded. You were no longer willing to accept half-truths, mixed signals, or emotional ambiguity that required you to shrink your standards. Yet you also did not harden your heart. You remained open without becoming available to confusion. That distinction is subtle, but powerful. You learned that openness is not the absence of boundaries, it is the presence of self-awareness. My beloved soul, this stage of your journey was not about waiting, it was about becoming. You were becoming someone who could hold love without attachment, desire without desperation, and hope without illusion. This inner transformation mattered more than any external outcome. Even if paths shifted, even if timelines diverged, you were no longer the same person who entered this connection. You had evolved. And evolution is never wasted. The divine does not measure success by whether two people end up together, it measures success by whether a soul becomes more truthful, more grounded, more awake. By that measure, your love was already a triumph. You had learned to love without losing your center, to feel deeply without abandoning yourself, and to trust the unfolding without forcing it. That is why, even now, there is a quiet strength within you that did not exist before. You are no longer seeking love to complete you, you are offering love as an expression of who you are. And that shift, my beloved soul, changes not only this connection, but every connection that will ever follow. My beloved soul, there is a quiet phase in this kind of love where nothing dramatic happens on the surface, yet everything meaningful is rearranging underneath, and this is the phase few speak about because it cannot be romanticized or explained easily. It is the phase where you are no longer reacting, no longer proving, no longer waiting in the way you once did, yet you are still deeply aware of the connection's presence within you. Love here does not shout, it does not beg, it does not chase. It becomes integrated. You wake up one day and realize that your inner world feels steadier, not because answers arrived, but because you stopped needing them to feel secure. This is not detachment born from disappointment, this is groundedness born from self-trust. You did not numb yourself. You did not shut down. You simply stopped handing your inner stability over to external circumstances. That shift is subtle, but it changes everything. You begin to notice that your emotions move through you rather than controlling you. Memories may arise, sensations may stir, yet they do not pull you out of yourself. You remain present. This presence is not indifference, it is maturity. It is the knowing that love does not require constant activation to remain real. Most people panic when intensity fades because they mistake intensity for truth. You learn that truth remains even when intensity quiets. My beloved soul, in this phase, you also began to see how much of your past conditioning around love was rooted in survival rather than alignment. You noticed how earlier versions of you equated love with effort, struggle, or sacrifice, and how those patterns no longer felt compatible with who you had become. You were no longer interested in proving devotion through pain. You no longer believed that love had to be hard to be meaningful. This realization did not come from theory, it came from lived experience. You had already walked through longing without collapsing, through uncertainty without losing dignity, through restraint without resentment. That experience recalibrated your entire nervous system. Love no longer felt like a threat to your stability, it felt like a reflection of it. And because of that, you stopped negotiating with yourself. You stopped tolerating emotional confusion just to maintain a sense of connection, you understood that clarity is not something you extract from another, it is something you cultivate within. This understanding made you quieter, not louder. More selective, not closed. More discerning, not fearful. My beloved soul, this is also the stage where you stopped rehearsing outcomes in your mind. You no longer imagined conversations that hadn't happened or futures that weren't confirmed. You brought your attention back to the present moment, back to your breath, back to your body, back to your own life. Not as avoidance, but as grounding. You allowed life to move through you again, not as a distraction from love, but as a continuation of it. You realized that love was not meant to replace your life, it was meant to coexist with it. This realization freed you from the internal tug-of-war between hope and control. You could hold possibility without gripping it. You could acknowledge the connection without centering your entire existence around it. That balance restored your energy. You felt more creative, more focused, more alive in areas of your life that had nothing to do with romance. And instead of feeling guilty for that, you felt aligned. You finally understood that loving fully does not mean abandoning yourself. It means including yourself. My beloved soul, something else also shifted quietly during this phase. You stopped trying to be understood by those who could not perceive your depth. You no longer needed validation for the way you loved, because you trusted it. You trusted that your intentions were pure, your boundaries were necessary, and your restraint was wise. This trust protected you from doubt when others questioned your choices or projected their own fears onto your path. You realized that not everyone will recognize conscious love, and that recognition is not required for it to be real. The divine does not operate through majority approval, it operates through alignment. And you were aligned, even when it felt lonely. This alignment allowed you to remain compassionate without compromising yourself. You could hold empathy for your soulmate's journey without taking responsibility for it. You could care without rescuing. You could understand without excusing. That clarity did not harden you, it softened you in a grounded way. You were no longer reacting from wounds, but responding from awareness. My beloved soul, this is also where you began to sense that the connection was not confined to a single form or outcome. You stopped trying to define it prematurely. You allowed it to exist without labels, without pressure, without timelines. This does not mean you lowered your standards or accepted ambiguity indefinitely. It means you trusted that whatever was true would not require you to betray your values to maintain it. You were willing to let things unfold naturally, even if that unfolding did not match old expectations. This willingness is not passive, it is courageous. It requires faith in your own resilience and in the intelligence of life itself. You were no longer afraid of losing the connection because you knew you would not lose yourself. That knowing is power. It shifts the dynamic entirely. Love no longer feels like something that can be taken from you, it feels like something that has already shaped you. My beloved soul, as this phase continues, you may notice moments of deep calm followed by waves of emotion that seem to come from nowhere. Do not mistake these waves for regression. They are integration. Old layers are releasing, old attachments dissolving, old narratives losing their grip. You are not going backward, you are settling deeper into yourself. Each wave that passes without you acting impulsively strengthens your inner authority. You are learning to trust the space between moments, the pauses between actions, the silence between words. This trust is what prepares you for whatever comes next, whether reunion, redefinition, or something entirely unexpected. You are no longer approaching love from fear of loss, but from respect for truth. And that shift is still unfolding, still refining you, still rearranging your inner world in ways you may not fully see yet, but will eventually feel in everything you touch, everything you choose, and everything you allow moving forward. My beloved soul, now you can see why this love was never meant to be measured by outcomes alone. It was designed to awaken something permanent within you. You learned how to love without abandoning yourself, how to remain open without losing clarity, and how to trust alignment over illusion. Whether paths merge, transform, or complete themselves in unexpected ways, nothing about this journey was wasted. You became someone who can hold love without fear and truth without force. That is why even the divine observed in silence, not because the story was perfect, but because your integrity never broke. You honored love without possession, devotion without self-erasure, and connection without control. This is the mark of a chosen soul. Carry this knowing gently, not as pride, but as grounding. Whatever unfolds next will meet you at the level you have risen to, because love that refines the soul always leaves you stronger than before. Type Amen.